Hi, everyone, and welcome to Moonbeam Musings. Today we have our guest Kris Warren to talk about megalithic structures. Kris Warren is a singer-songwriter. So, welcome, Kris.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Megalithic structures. So, I'll kick us off with Stonehenge.
Okie dokie.
So, something that I found quite interesting recently was around the fact that in my ignorance, I thought Stonehenge was for pagans. And in fact, it's actually was built by Neolithic communities between 3000 and 1600 BC, or so the experts say. Um,
Mm.
and it was used to align with the solstice and for burials and rituals and seasonal gatherings. Um, it's not that far from Avebury as well. I don't know if that's how you say it, Avebury.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just found it quite interesting because I think I've never really paid much attention. There's a really great video I'm going to add on here, which I took whilst driving past Stonehenge a few weeks ago, actually. And I understood it was used for ceremonies and it's been used for many, many years, and pagans, and a lot of people still go there to this day in the UK. But I just assumed it was part of the pagan gathering. And in fact, the site itself for Stonehenge was used even before Stonehenge was built
Hmm.
as a ground for burials and rituals and gathering, which alludes to the fact that it has some significance to those cultures.
Hmm.
For thousands of years, it's had a significance.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. I mean, it's a fascinating and eternally mystifying structure for a number of reasons. And yeah, I think you covered it there with I mean, there's plenty of interpretations on its use. I think it start with its use because what's interesting about that is you kind of end up with a fundamental question, really, which is kind of why. You know, it's a sort of thing that would seem quite odd today if you just sort of went, okay, there's a ceremonial. What's the ceremonial equivalent today? Do you see what I'm asking? Something like a festival or like the Burning Man festival. Something for some reason, large groups of people, for whatever reason, became drawn to this place, and the site itself had a certain quality about it. That one thing that just came up when you were talking about that was this is through mainstream archaeology. A really interesting feature about the site is that the I'll try and get this right. The channel that runs on the summer solstice, so where the sun comes in between the two pillars during the solstice, of which obviously they'd organised the stones to frame. So that's kind of without. I don't think that's in question. It's like it's tracking the movement of the sun and possibly the rest of the planets, etc. You know. But what's interesting is there's a natural. So I say natural, there's a natural what's the word, channel that geologists have proven is naturally forming, right? So there's a naturally forming channel which faces the direct point where the solstice rises up. And so the reason why that sort of come to mind is that something phenomenal, I can never say that word, phenomenologically missing about our understanding about, in my view there's something phenomenologically missing in our understanding of these sites, because and indeed, like, what you could even say what the earth actually is, or something, to on a much grander context. It's like, well, the earth had provided, from a certain perspective, the earth had provided the channel which already gave direct alignment to the sun rising on the solstice before the structure was even there. It was like it was kind of meant to be or whatever. So anyway, that kind of gets the imagination going, and I suppose that's a good way of framing from a personal point of view. It's my sort of opinions on the subject, because that's what they are. I mean, I tend to read a lot about this subject. There's a lot of people that are really qualified in their field, and I'm more drawn towards the more esoteric, um, alternative views on the purposes and to some extent the dating of these structures. And there's a number of people that probably people out there have already heard of, like the most popular at the moment is Graham Hancock, who's got a series on Netflix, um, who's a proponent of a sort of pre-Diluvian civilization that had a kind of technology that was able to put these kind of structures together. Because I mean, where that jumps off in an interesting way is what is still currently unexplained in mainstream science is what they've recently discovered is the altar stone came from Orkney. So you're talking about Neolithic people, like getting I don't know how many tons that stone is, all the way. Even if you explain logistically how they did it, there's a massive neon flashing why. Why would they take a stone from 800 miles away across sea? And I don't know how seafaring they were meant to have been, etc. You're then left with a really big why. Is did they go to all of that effort to get a particular stone from a particular area and bring it to another end of the country? I don't know, but I suppose where it's interesting, and that's where the theories emerge. And I have to admit within myself, it's like um, you know, I'm emotionally kind of invested or something in a lot of these things because it sparks the imagination, and I don't think that's a bad thing, because you know there is. I'm probably going way off piste here, but I think what it does is it actually connects us to something about our humanity, something which is it seems lacking in the kind of modern age, to one of a better term. Why are all these things becoming more um, popular again or more interesting is that there at the very least you could have theory A, B, or C. At the very least, the culture that built those sites had a much different view of reality than we do today, and possibly something that may be of great use to us in this time of, in quote, trouble. Of wars and we seem to be quite fractured as a species to an extent, and you know,
Mm.
and I can see in myself that it draws me there because at least in a romantic level, it kind of it suggests a time where there may have been more harmony, there may have been more community, there may have been more. That might not have been true. It might have been brutal, and, but yet, and it probably was. But yeah, there's a load of stuff there that you've just sort of sparked off from the
Yeah, I
sort of
understand.
one study. Yeah,
I mean, so back then the belief systems were more in animism,
well, that's the
and
theory that it was.
people were more open to, folklore and magic, and our thoughts and structures now are very fixed.
Yeah.
It's why a lot of people talk about the patriarchy, and it's a very fixed way. And what that does is it makes reality very fixed and doesn't allow for
Mm.
possibilities, other possibilities. And as we know, science is only the science that we know is only the science we know right now, and not the reality. It's also like philosophy, science is research based, and that's what it's about rather than it being gospel.
Yeah.
And so,
How do you
I
mean that?
think,
So just
sorry.
explain that bit for me.
Well, I mean, so based on when you're doing a scientific experiment, you'll have a certain amount of parameters, and you only know what you know at that point, and you come to a conclusion.
Yeah.
But as
It
science
depends.
goes on, then they find out more things, then the conclusion becomes different. So the reality actually changes.
Yeah.
Um, so we only know what we know right now, and I think it's being open to the unknown, isn't it? And these people were more open to that, and so what was driving them may not seem logical.
Yes.
You know,
Mm.
that's why they'd move a stone. And they were perhaps more open to energetics of things, perhaps how stones could be charged, or that particular stone was used in ceremonies up in the Orkney Islands. There could have been
Well, yeah,
anything
there
from
was.
tribes or the equivalent of groups of people that were
Well,
linked
yeah.
somehow.
At that point, I would say, for those who are interested, research Howard Crowhurst, who's a he's kind of a I would say is an expert's a terrible word because he's more like an alternative researcher into megalithic sites, but he's more in a kind of very layman's way. He connects the geometric lines between the sites. I've seen only his stuff on British Isles and France, but there's a line that runs through Avebury through to Carnac in France that runs all the way through up to Orkney, and that if you just do it on geometric like shapes, they're all kind of like triangles. And there was a there at least appears from his research there was a knowledge of mathematics. Now, at least even if there wasn't a knowledge of mathematics, there was an internal reading of the sort of sites that had natural intuition, which turns out to be mathematical. You could reverse engineer it. It's just that we don't, as you covered, the way of seeing the world, and so that's where it would intersect with somebody like Jean Gesber for me. It's like talking about the different structures of consciousness, and potentially the builders of those sites. In again, Jean Gesber, look that one up. But you've got the archaic. I always get them mixed up, so I actually wrote this one down. But I thought it related really well to this subject. Archaic, magical, mythical, mental, and integral, like layers of consciousness, which could be um, attributed to a human lifespan from childhood through to old age. It's a micro macro kind of idea, but in theory, in theory, the people that were building these sites would be somewhere in the magical mythical stage of consciousness, which is where in Gesber's terminology, it's where the individual starts to see themselves as separate from the world, and so they start seeing time emerging as a linear process, ever so slightly, so it would stand to reason that they would want to map the stars and the cycles of things, because you could see that time isn't at the very base level would have been the measuring of biological processes. That's how it would have begun, or cycles. It would have been like that move from here to here. This kind of
Well,
this
there is something about
fertile.
survival, though, as well, isn't there? In the cycles, in harvesting, in
Yeah,
growing crops, and
yeah, it would have been
so
really, really crucial, right? Yeah, to be able to the power that would have been given to those that understood that as well would be worth considering. It's like you're probably seeing the emergence of the kind of beginnings of the sort of transitions into the more modern world, where even still those with the knowledge of calendars, timings of things, still hold great power over the world. I mean, you don't have to dig too far into conspiracy theories to know that things like elections and you know polls and things like that are all kind of put on certain dates for certain strategic reasons. And somebody, I think it was a friend of ours, Jim Morris, that said that they teach. astrology. So astrology, the version that we get is like Russell Grant or whatever in the Daily Mail. But the actual knowledge of calendar, the calendrical studies
Mm.
are taught in Eton and the high, the high pay, the big schools or whatever, because yeah, there's an obvious advantage to kind of knowing the cycles of things because you're ahead of the game, whatever the game is. Um, so yeah, I think perhaps those the use of those sites kind of changed over time as literally as time became more solidified, as time became, because in Gesper's world it's like, well, we're in the mental, in the fourth stage of consciousness right now in the world, where we're very much a separate thing, and time's very solid, and we're in this battle against time. It's a race against time. We've objectified time, and then the proposition is that the phase after that is an integration phase, where we're able to see the other structures at the same time, account for them all, and sort of not deny them. So I don't know. That sort of links in a bit to maybe a resurgence in the interest of megalithic sites, because it feels like whatever they were tracking then, it may be that we're tracking something similar now at this tail end of whatever they call late stage capitalism, and there's a general, they call it the meaning crisis, right? So John Vervaeke, that's another reference. If some of the philosophers of the day are talking about the meaning crisis. Is very much what I write about in my band. Um, what is the meaning crisis? Well, in my view, it's just the isolated self, or the time based self that is in the race against time. Certainly over the COVID era, has had that kind of sort of just almost shattered, and then it feels like we're all kind of just clambering around a little bit, just sort of going, well, what it was like before that didn't really make sense, and then that was crazy, and now we're sort of in this weird world where we're sort of doing the same thing but not.
Yeah, a bit lost.
There's a little sense of a lostness, because it's like
Yeah.
it's an unknown, and perhaps that's why these sites have become so of interest again, because like they, who knows, they might have just, that whole thing of why did they bring it down from Orkney, because they realized that it had some kind of energetic property, and that's what they do know, like technically, that it's quartz, heavy in quartz, like a lot of all the stones there have, and they've measured that, scientists, and it's like, well, it's really strong electromagnetic fields that are generated in these sites. So either that's an accident, and they were just like, oh no, we just chose stones, and they all happen to have like heavy, lots of quartz in them. But that's where I'd say Freddie Silver's really good, because he then talks about how those kind of techniques were carried through into church building in the early Christianity, and even to this day, I love that when he said, he's like, that's why we have the word altar, because it's about altering the state of the mind, and what they realize is that the quartz properties of the altar stone, or the stones in Stonehenge, are magnified in prayer or in a meditative state. There's an amplification process that happens because of, and that's, then you're getting into like toroidal spheres and things like that. These the energy fields are formed through the interaction with the participant, and then you have entrance. You go through the entrance to be entranced, and you go to the altar to be altered, and so it's in the language, but we just sort of got kind of lost. Anyway, Freddie Silver talks really, really thoroughly about that. Um,
Yeah. I mean, if you, I have heard that, for example, clear quartz can record information.
Right, right.
So I don't know about other stones. I mean, in our Western culture, we use crystals and things like that for protection. Certain people, there's a more of an openness to that now. Over the years, it was more hippie, and there's certain people that disregard it and certain people that believe in it, and they'll wear certain crystals and stones. There's a lot more being done now on vibrational energy and experiments and scientific experiments, as you say.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, that's
Looking
interesting.
at frequencies of things. Um, so yes, I mean, all those years ago, this particular site, I mean, where it's placed is beautiful. It's very clear to see the sky. Um, it's sort of slightly raised. It's not a massive hill, and it was used for rituals, etc. And then they've decided to put this particular structure there. Now, we don't know exactly why they decided at that point to put the structure there, why they've chosen that specific material and stones to do that. But it could be an energetic reason.
Yeah. I mean, I like to think of it that way. I mean, again, these are where all the esoteric researchers are placing their attention. I think that does come from kind of you don't have to do that much reading on the subject to realize the traditional, um, the mainstream version of it is inadequate to really describe the kind of truly unusualness of the site and the purpose of it. We just can't quite grasp why a culture would do that, really, because it's like a different. I'm very much of the belief that, and it is a belief that it's a slightly different consciousness that was building those things, a very different view of the world, and you don't know. Like, I mean, see, that's where it gets really. I mean, my favorite kind of off the wall kind of theory, and it's even in the Bible. It's like the walls of Jericho, where the walls came down, and in that story, it's like they're using trumpets, and they walk around the walls of the city, like making sounds out of this trumpet, and the walls fall down. Now, either that's allegorical and it's metaphorical, or there's something literal in the knowledge or that may have been passed down from these times, that sound, that we do know enough about sound that it can shatter glasses, it can cause mass anxiety. I mean, Hitler used to use it at rallies to get people fearful. You just like send a low rumble. Now, some of these writers, and I'm like, well, you can't discount it, because if you had enough focused attention and using frequency, you can levitate objects. It's been known you can do that. They've done that in laboratories now. They know how to levitate objects with, albeit very small. Now, you just don't know what kind of culture that had a much more innate connection, a different connection. I don't know. It's like it's all very subjective, isn't it? But a different connection to nature and the very, being a human would have felt different. Perhaps we would have been less separated, much more. And you and I have experienced what a group is. In group work, you can achieve much more than you can in a small group or even on your own. Now, I would say if the purpose was there and the kind of intention was there, why couldn't you move an object from 800 miles away? With the right intention behind it. But you got to have the intention, because otherwise it would be pointless, right? Why would you waste energy when you're in a harvesting cycle? You're probably on death's, survival mode. It doesn't make any sense to kind of go and do that unless there was another intention behind the culture that
Yeah, it's what's the motivation. So, for
yeah,
example, if you look at the Colosseum and the Forum in Italy,
yeah,
in
yeah,
Rome, which I love,
mm,
um, the motivation behind building that, the Forum was where people lived, and it was a place that was quite important to society there at the time. But the Colosseum was for entertainment, and they spent all that money on a place for entertainment, and that's what it was built for. So you're going a little bit more into the commercial left brain
yeah,
world there, because there's the feedback is people would pay. It was also community based. There was more of an element of community than perhaps sometimes nowadays there is when things are solely commercial based. But this, when we look at it practically, with our left brains, we can't say, well, why would you just stick a load of stones in a circle there? And, what's, what's the point of it?
Yeah, and you could say as simply, because practically they can go, well, you can see that they're measuring the sky, but it's a lot of effort, you know, and it's got more opulence and grandeur to it to measure the sky. I mean, surely they could have done that with the smaller, it was something celebratory at the very least. It was like they were connected to something which I don't know. It seems to have like more of a joyous relationship with the cosmos, or what have you, the world and the cosmos. So, um, yeah, I think there's much to discover in that. I think we are in the. It feels like we are in the time where the the rigidity of things is starting to loosen up a bit. That's why it feels like a little like
Mm,
everyone feels a little bit like, oh, I'm not really sure what's going on, sort of thing, because it's loosening up a little bit, and even like mainstream science is starting to go, oh, hang on a minute, like maybe we don't know everything, and we're not at the pinnacle that we thought we were. We haven't accounted for consciousness. And people are going back to people like David Bohm and Krishnamurti. That the conversations between those two, when they're really exploring the kind of links between where science and philosophy, the really crucial conversations that are going on simultaneously, I'd say, but it's healthy when there's philosophy and science working kind of together. But it's felt like in
yeah.
recent times it's just been like empirically science data modeling, and math
Well,
is all, but it's not. It doesn't really. Yeah, it doesn't
well,
hold you.
yeah. I mean, all of these discoveries are always through a lens,
Yeah,
and you've always got to look at the motivation. And if someone spent their life work researching something, then their motivation is going to be to prove it,
yeah,
and it may not be done on purpose, but the outcome may be, well, it will be through their lens. So everything's seen through the different lens. So if you're more on the philosophical side, you're going to see things more in that way, and if you're more on the scientific side, you're going to see through that way, because we're all
yeah,
human and we're seeing reality through our own lenses. So there's no right or wrong. All we can have is a conversation.
yeah. Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
it's like the conversation seems to have dried up a little bit, and then what made me laugh the other day, and it's just the way YouTube frames it. But it was like Richard Dawkins and Brett Weinstein, who's like, he's kind of like a fringe-ish like figure that it, anyway. He's kind of representing the spiritual side of the argument, with Richard Dawkins being the staunch like atheist. But the way it's kind of framed is like a wrestling match. So you go on YouTube, it's like Dawkins v Weinstein, and it's got like, it's really, they're all sort of like AI airbrushed images of them sort of ready to like beat the shit out of each other. And I'm like, that's the kind of that's where science is at. That's the gulf that exists between, you know the technical terms of that is like the reductionist materialist viewpoint, and then the other side, which I'd say he's a really intelligent guy, this Weinstein guy, but there's something, anyway, I won't go too much into that, but he's kind of representative of kind of like a movement towards something that would be akin to a more animistic approach to science, i.e., that consciousness is imbued in everything, rather than we're sort of objectively, the world's out there and we're in here, and that's, we're just a brain which is true on one level, right? But the sort of more animist stroke spiritual approach would be to say, well, we haven't accounted for consciousness in the maths and the science that we're doing. It's all down to the reduction to things to their component constituent parts. And the smaller you drill down, you just find smaller and smaller and smaller, and bigger and bigger, but but you haven't fully accounted for the perceiver in the experiment, if you like. So personified by the double slit experiment, which there's still the wave and particle kind of paradox. But yeah, like it's an interesting point in time where that's the only way that the discussion can happen at the moment. It's like a wrestling match. They're on stage together, just going. But at least it's happening, At least it's starting to happen. But yeah,
Hmm.
we started with Stonehenge, but I think it's really, I don't know. It felt like to me something really shifted over the COVID era, and now it's like sometimes I'm reading articles and I'm like, wow, like does I'm just reading one article in the paper and it's talking about the stone coming down from Orkney, and it's like, and then they would have put it on rollers and then they would have rolled it down the thing for 800 miles and popped it on top of the thing and went, oh, that looks nice, doesn't it? Well done. We just got 800 miles. And there's not even a little kind of like, oh, why would they do that? You know, they just
Yeah, no one's questioning it.
they just
The
don't want. All
motivation.
they're worried about is like, how many twigs they had to sort of roll the stone from Orkney onto a boat and then all the way down. And it's like, yeah, but why do they do that? It's like you don't have any of that inquiry, and you're just like, oh, okay.
No, exactly. A lot of these programs, which is one of the reasons I wanted to do this YouTube channel and podcast, because a lot of the programs around these are really interesting, and it's good to have that side and to think how did this happen and how did they build the pyramids and how, But there's when you look at humans, that's what I'm really interested in, their motivations and why they did things. And
Mm.
if we go back to Stonehenge, everybody thinks, oh, Stonehenge, the stones at Stonehenge, but actually, it's 26 kilometers.
Yeah, right.
It's not just the structure in the middle;
Yeah,
it's that whole area. So there's something about that whole area. And earlier, when you were mentioning, was it Howard
Howard
Crowhurst?
Jones. Yeah,
Was it was what he does? Is that along the same route as the ley lines, or
kind of.
is
Yeah,
it a completely different
yeah.
school
It
of
is.
thought?
It's related. I get mixed up a little bit because Freddie Silver, again, like, just recommend everyone just to go and watch a few videos from both. But it relates to the ley lines or source energy. That's one way of describing it. Howard Crowhurst, as far as I remember, because it's been a while since I watched his stuff, he his ideas were something around that the sites themselves were kind of like like an acupuncture on the earth. And so I've heard it said before about England, and specifically the British Isles, that it produces an unnatural, not unnatural, that's the wrong word, an unprecedented amount of healer type people because of the type of like composite. It's to do with like the earth composition and all kinds of stuff. But I'm going off piece a little bit there. But his ideas are something that it wasn't just ceremonial, like measuring the skies and things like that. It's almost like an acupuncture procedure on the planet itself, and they were aware of how to. If you did that and you did
Mm.
that, then it would create an energy link between here and here, and you're sort of directing energy in a So I'm not sure in mainstream science whether they've actually kind of proven ley lines or energy, but I think they're very aware of like energy currents of the earth, like electric currents.
Mm. Yeah,
So
so like the chi of the UK or the chi of the what globe or
yeah,
yeah.
and then you're into like the really nuts conspiracy theories, which I of course love. But then there is an idea that there was some knowledge that the Earth was going into a period where it was going to be very challenging for humanity, and these sites were deliberately placed to maintain a certain frequency over a longer period of time, and that's really out there. But I quite like, I'm willing. There's the problem with I have is I'm willing to go with most things, but I
Well, I mean,
you
you
know,
look at the we're we're living in a Western society and we're brought up in a Western world, and you know we are open to more things now because many years ago we wouldn't have been open to acupuncture, and that is still practiced in the East, and a lot of things are practiced in the East
yeah,
that are not fully understood by the West even
yeah, yeah,
today. So it's not just in from the past; it's that as well. So you know, if you said to someone in the East about this particular concept with the Earth, then very much so it could well be believed by people quite easily. So I think we have to take that into account, and that's why it's so important. The motivation and where everyone's coming from, like their culture, their belief, their
yeah.
where they've grown up, how they've been indoctrinated, you know.
Well, yeah, it's
So
interesting you said about the East because I don't know enough about the subject, but I know a little bit. In that, well, one thing that just came to mind there is somebody said that the dragons of China, like especially the dragons, symbolize the ley lines, the sort like source energy.
okay.
So dragons were very much part of that kind of mythos or whatever you, because the Chinese had a through Taoism and all this kind of stuff. It's still very much present in the culture as well, even though they've kind of adopted an in quote kind of more capitalist system. They're much more in the modern kind of in that sense, but they've still maintained quite a lot of the understandings of energy and the you know that type of thing in the culture. But yeah, like I quite like that idea that the dragons were because they're the idea of the source, the person. That's where the word sorcerer comes from. It's the manipulation of source energy. Yeah, I'm just
Yeah, of course, of course. No, they power and good fortune dragons
yeah.
in Chinese.
I can't remember who said that anyway, but it just came into my head. But I quite like that as at least symbolically. Um, yeah, so we've covered quite a lot on Stonehenge, or at least
Yeah,
we've
that
done a
sounds
lot within
sounds
it.
good. No, it
Yeah,
sounds good. I mean, anything else you want to mention on that?
I don't think so. I mean, like I can already feel myself going. It just opens a whole, you know, can of worms basically in terms of subjects. It could go everywhere, but that's probably because it it sort of feels like that area of study is become really popular again because it's timely. It's literally time to kind of re-investigate what those cultures were up to. What were as you said, like what are their motivations and perhaps because I think we're so at a loss. It seems on a mass scale we're at a loss of kind of going. Well, the system that we have is kind of running out of steam.
Yeah, there's a dissatisfaction in society right
Yeah,
now.
there's not a collective. There's not a meaning. It's they call it a meaning crisis for that reason. It's like, well, why are we working all of our lives to earn this and do this, and have we missed something fundamental about the nature of being in
Yeah,
that
I
in that and something about these sites represent an opportunity for us to go back and rediscover something about our humanity that perhaps has got lost or is there to be rediscovered if you're looking a bit more glass half full.
yeah, I mean, the introduction of the internet and technology advancements in recent years, have highlighted consumerism
Mm-hmm.
and also made information available, very available, which can be quite overwhelming because there's a lot of information available now. It's also what's true, what's not true.
Mm.
And I think it's opened up a lot of questions about self, questions about, there's the whole creativity question because some jobs are less creative now.
Yeah.
And we may move into a different era with AI. So it opens up a lot of questions, basically, which we won't go into today, but I'm
It,
sure
it,
we
it,
will
seems
have you back.
it seems like whatever field you talk about right now, whatever podcast you do, it'll end up with AI.
I should have tried to avoid it. Maybe that's what
Yeah.
I should be doing.
Oh no,
Um,
AI is a really good one.
yeah,
That's probably
yeah.
my favourite subject at the moment. But
Okay.
then we're
Well,
in,
let's bring you back in to talk about AI.
then we're into the left brain, right brain um, issue. I call it an issue, but if you have an AI which is more left brain, and what would a right brain AI be like? But I don't think we have that. Anyway, that's for another podcast.
Yeah, that is. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Kris. We appreciate it. And all many of the different people that you've mentioned and books and
Yeah,
things, what I'll do is I'll post that in the description below, and also links to some of the things that you're working on, such as your music, etc., will
yeah.
also be there. So yeah, everybody take a look in the description.